The story begins in the quiet, unassuming suburbs of Wichita, Kansas, a place where life moved at a steady, predictable rhythm.
Where neighbors waved to each other, children played in the streets, and nothing about the calm surroundings suggested that one of the most chilling and methodical serial killers
In American history was living among them, watching, waiting, learning, because long before the name BTK became synonymous with fear,
Before the cryptic letters and taunting messages, before the police realized they were dealing with a mind that craved not just violence, but recognition.
there was simply a man blending into ordinary life, hiding something dark, something patient, something that would soon reveal itself in a way that would shock the nation.
And that revelation came on January 15, 1974, a winter morning that began like any other for the Otero family. Joseph, Julie, and their two young children, Joseph Jr. and Josephine, but ended in a way so brutal, so calculated that it shattered the illusion of safety for an entire community.
Because the man who entered their home that day did not come in a moment of rage or desperation. He came with intent, with preparation.
with a fantasy he had already played out in his mind countless times, initially presenting himself as someone in need, someone asking for food and money.
But that facade quickly dissolved as he revealed his true purpose, taking control of the situation with chilling precision, binding each member of the family,
Restricting their movement, asserting dominance over every second of their final moments. And what made it even more horrifying was the methodical nature of it all.
the lack of chaos, the deliberate pacing, as though he was not just committing a crime but fulfilling a script he had written long before stepping through their door.
When it was over, when the silence settled over the house, the killer left as quietly as he had arrived, disappearing back into the same ordinary world.
That had never suspected him, leaving behind a crime scene that baffled investigators. Because this was not impulsive violence, it was controlled, organized, intentional.
And as the police struggled to piece together what had happened, the city of Wichita began to feel something unfamiliar creeping in. A quiet, persistent fear, the realization that whoever had done this was not just capable of killing, but capable of planning, of waiting, of choosing.
And that meant he could strike again at any time. And that fear proved justified, because just months later,
This time targeting Catherine Bright, a young woman in her own home, where once again the killer attempted to impose the same pattern,
The same control, binding and overpowering. But this time, something went wrong. Something disrupted his carefully constructed plan.
As she resisted, and a family member unexpectedly returned home, a confrontation followed.
A rare moment where the killer's control slipped, where reality did not align perfectly with his fantasy, and yet instead of deterring him, instead of forcing him into retreat, it seemed to refine him, to sharpen his approach, because what followed was not silence, not remorse, but escalation.
and more disturbingly, communication. Because the killer was not content with anonymity. He wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged.
And so he reached out, sending a letter to a local newspaper detailing the Otero murders with disturbing accuracy, providing information only the killer could know.
and within that letter, he introduced the name that would define him: BTK, short for bind, torture, kill.
A branding of his own violence. And from that moment, the case transformed into something far more complex. Because now investigators were not just dealing with a killer.
They were dealing with someone who wanted to play a game, someone who sought attention, who derived satisfaction not just from the act itself, but from the fear and fascination that followed. And as years passed, that pattern continued, with murders occurring sporadically.
Each one reinforcing the same chilling elements: careful selection of victims, surveillance, stalking, the intrusion into personal spaces where people felt safest.
And then the methodical execution of control, as seen in the murder of Shirley Vian in 1977, where he entered her home, bound her, and carried out his ritual while her children were present in the house. A detail that underscored not just his cruelty, but his calculated disregard for anything beyond his own desires.
Masons. And later that same year, the murder of Nancy Fox. Another carefully planned attack, followed by a phone call to the police in which
Directing them to the scene, again inserting himself into the narrative, again ensuring that his presence was felt beyond the physical act.
And what made all of this even more unsettling was the growing realization that this man, this self-proclaimed BTK, was living a double life.
because there were no obvious suspects, no clear patterns that pointed to someone outside the community, which meant that he was likely someone within it, someone who blended in.
Someone who could move unnoticed between normalcy and horror, attending work, interacting with neighbors, perhaps even participating in community activities, all while harboring these dark compulsions. And then, just as suddenly as the killings had punctuated the late 1970s, they began to slow.
becoming less frequent, until eventually, after a final incident in 1991, they stopped altogether, and with that silence came uncertainty.
Because no one knew if BTK had died, moved away, been imprisoned for another crime, or simply chosen to stop. And as years turned into more than a decade, the case gradually faded from the forefront of public consciousness, becoming one of those unresolved mysteries that linger in the background, unsettling but distant.
A chapter that seemed unfinished yet dormant, and for a time, it appeared that perhaps it would remain that way.
But what investigators and the public underestimated was the psychological drive behind the man responsible. Because someone who craved attention as deeply as he did was unlikely to remain silent forever. And that truth revealed itself in 2004, when, after more than 10 years of quiet, communication resumed.
As letters began arriving once again, sent to media outlets and police, referencing old crimes, providing new details.
And this time, the tone was different, more insistent, more frustrated, as though the killer felt overlooked, overshadowed by newer cases, demanding recognition, reminding the world that he was still out there, still watching, still capable, and these communications were not random.
They were calculated, filled with puzzles, codes, and taunts, designed to engage, to provoke, to challenge law enforcement.
I needed to know, but reaching out revealed everything. And in one critical exchange, he made a mistake that would ultimately lead to his capture, asking the police whether a floppy disk could be traced if he sent one containing information.
A question that revealed both his curiosity and his misplaced confidence, and the police, recognizing the opportunity, responded publicly that it would be safe.
A strategic deception that relied on the killer's need to believe he was smarter, more careful, more in control, and when he sent the disk, trusting that assurance, investigators analyzed it and uncovered metadata that pointed to a specific user, a name associated with a church, a location that narrowed the search dramatically.
And suddenly, after decades of uncertainty, the investigation had a tangible lead.
I never wanted this life, but I'm the only one who can solve it. This is my confession. And when authorities brought him in for questioning in 2005, the tension that had built over 30 years reached its peak. Because this was not just about evidence.
It was about confronting the reality that the person involved had remained unnoticed in plain sight all along.
Because rather than denying or resisting, Rader confessed. Calmly, methodically, describing each murder in detail, speaking with a detached, almost clinical tone that stripped the acts of emotion and revealed the extent to which he viewed them as controlled experiences rather than human tragedies.
And in court, as he described these events, people watched with a mix of shock and disbelief. As someone who had once challenged investigators now spoke openly.
Not out of remorse, but as though completing the final chapter of his own story. And yet, despite his attempt to control the narrative, to define himself through a name he had chosen, the outcome was no longer his to dictate. Because justice, though delayed, had finally caught up with him, bringing an end to the decades-long mystery.
But leaving behind a story that still raises difficult questions.
The way he navigated two completely different existences simultaneously, presenting one face to the world while concealing another that operated in secrecy, reminding us that danger does not always appear where we expect it, that it can exist within the familiar, within the routine, within the very structures we trust.
And as the story of the BTK Killer remains etched in true crime history, it serves as a chilling reminder of the complexities of
and the unsettling reality that sometimes the most terrifying threats are not the ones that stand out, but the ones that blend in, waiting patiently, observing quietly, until the moment they choose to reveal themselves, leaving behind not just victims, but a lingering question that continues to echo long after the case is closed. How well do we truly know the people around us? And how easily can darkness hide behind the mask of normal life?